All right, guys, so today we're going to talk about personality, okay, which is the last part of, so in the new CED, they combine, like motivation, emotion, and personality are all combined into one unit. And those three combined, all right, motivation, emotion we did yesterday, those three combined make up somewhere between 13 to 17% of the AP exam, with personality probably being the smallest percentage of those like three topics. Since this is not a particularly important unit, not a whole lot of stuff, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. Just kind of hit on the major stuff. So personality is our characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. Okay? All of the different things that make us. Personality is just the all-encompassing us. We are going to talk about five theories. Okay? Psychoanalytic trait, humanistic, cognitive, social cognitive, and then what is called the self theory. So we're going to start with, I'm not entirely sure how much emphasis they are putting on psychoanalytic theory now. Okay, because psychoanalytic theory is considered to be so outdated, and so there's very little empirical evidence for it. I think that they would really just ask you maybe a defense mechanism question, or maybe something with the psychosexual stage. But so psychoanalytic theory is it's kind of the beginning of modern psychology. Fathered by Sigmund Freud in the early 1900s in Vienna. And what psychoanalytic theory focused on was the relationship between consciousness and unconsciousness. Right? The relationship between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. Freud believed that deep within our consciousness, in areas that we couldn't consciously reach, there were really powerful forces that were guiding our behavior. Okay, and that in our unconscious we had all these kind of unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, memories. Freud is real big. He believed that at our core, humans are evil, and that basically most of our behavior is just trying to mask that. And so in our unconscious, it was basically just like our sexual and aggressive urges. Early psychoanalysis, he called it psychoanalysis because it's analyzing the mind. Right? We talked about it with therapy as well. Okay, but some of the techniques he used to try to tap into people's unconscious: free association, which is where it's just basically just say whatever comes to mind. The idea there is that there would be these little, what he called burps of the unconscious. And then early on, and he went away from this, but early on he did a lot of dream interpretation. He wrote a book called On Dreams. And what Freud believed was that dreams were hidden wish fulfillments. And what we dreamed about was actually our unconscious, and that in dreams had two parts. The manifest content of a dream is the storyline, what you are dreaming about. The latent content is the hidden meaning of the dream. Okay? Latent means hidden. And that was Freud's job, or the psychoanalyst job, to interpret the dream and tell you what it really meant. So Freud believed our personality was like an iceberg, that very little of it was above the surface. Most of it was hidden. And he broke it down into 3 different parts, what's called the id, the ego, and the superego. And they all kind of develop at different times. So the id is the largest part of our personality, but it exists entirely in the unconscious. Right? It is also the part of our personality that we are born with. Okay, babies are entirely id. And the whole idea of the id is the id's goal is just to satisfy basic needs and drives however it can. Okay? Really the goal is survival, reproduction, and aggression, and the id functions off what is called the pleasure principle, which is essentially, basically the id is just looking for immediate gratification. I want it now. And if you think about babies are just like animals that all they want is immediate gratification. When they're hungry, they got to eat right then. When they got to poop, they got to poop right. They're going to poop right then. Right? Babies just want what they need right at that moment. Freud analogized the id to a horse without a rider. Okay, just like a wild horse. He called it id. Id means it in German. The second part of our personality to develop, and it exists partially in consciousness, is our ego. The ego's job is to rein in the id. Okay? If the id is a wild horse, the ego is a rider on it, pulling it back in. This is what people see as our personality. Okay, so we don't always let everybody see our id, because our id might not be good. Right? The ego is what people see. Ego means I. Okay, what people see as our personality. And the whole goal of the ego is to satisfy the id's needs in realistic ways. Okay, if the id wants to go have sex with someone, right, the id's going to say, I'm just going to go take whoever I want. The ego is going to say, well, no, how about you ask somebody out, and then maybe you'll get there. Okay, so satisfy the id in realistic ways that are going to bring pleasure and avoid pain. Okay, what is called the reality principle. The last part of our personality to develop, he said, is called the superego. The superego, it develops when we do what is called identification, which is when we identify with our same-sex parent. Starts to develop around the age of 5. The superego is our conscience. It is our morals. Everybody has some people have stronger superegos than others, but while the ego is trying to satisfy the id, the superego is way over on the other side, being like, well, you shouldn't ever do anything fun, okay? And nothing should be pleasurable, all right? You should always do good. You should always do that. It's very, very judgy. And so once that starts to develop, the ego has to balance between the impulses of the id and then the restriction of the superego. Okay, it is very judgy. It's a lot of guilt. It's essentially like Angela from The Office. would be she's a lot of super, and Dwight is a lot of superego as well. Okay, so all right, so personality development, 5 stages. Freud believed that our personality developed mostly in childhood, that by the end of childhood we kind of were set up. Our personality was set up for good, for better, or for worse. And he said at different ages, our sexual gratification, all right, its need for sexual gratification was focused on different areas of the body, what are called erogenous zones. And at each age, we had to get enough sexual gratification in that area of the body. And if we got enough, then it was fine. But if not, then that could result in what is called a fixation, which could be a maladaptive personality trait in adulthood. So these things being fixated or stuck in a stage could lead to something going wrong with our personality in adulthood. First stage, oral stage. Okay, the erogenous zone is the mouth. Okay, particularly with breastfeeding. All right, this is very similar to trust versus mistrust. But Freud said that we had to get enough sexual gratification in our mouth by putting things in our mouth. If we got too much or too little, like if we were breastfed for too long or for not long enough, it could lead to an oral fixation, which is where, as an adult, you might always be putting stuff in your mouth, like biting your nails. He also said that like overeating and obesity was an oral fixation. That alcoholism, that being really sarcastic was an oral fixation. Okay, anything that you can use your mouth to attack somebody. All right. About age 2 to 3, the anal stage. Anal stage, the erogenous zone changes from the mouth to the butt area. All right, and in this stage, pleasure is focused on potty training and the elimination of bowels. Just like with autonomy versus shame and doubt, the main focus is control. With Erikson, it's control over temper tantrums. Right? With Freud, it's control over potty training. Fixation in this stage can lead to what's called an anal retentive personality, which people who are anal retentive are very uptight. Right? Phallic stage, age 3 to 6. Okay, pleasure zone is the genitals, although it's different with this. It's the genitals as a symbol of power, particularly male genitalia as a symbol of power. Freud also said that at this stage, children cope with incestuous feelings, that boys are jealous of their father for getting to sleep with their mother, and they want to murder their father and marry their mother. What's called the Oedipus complex. And then girls are jealous of their mother, right? And they want to get rid of their mother and sleep with their father. It's called the Electra complex. It also said that girls at this age have what's called penis envy. Right? They are jealous of the male phallic symbol, right? The symbol of power, penis. Okay, and that boys are afraid that the father is going to find out about their sexual feelings towards their mother, and they're going to punish them by castration, by chopping off their genitals. Resolution at this stage is what is called identification, which is where they side with the same-sex parent, And this is when the superego develops. All right, latency, exact same thing as industry versus inferiority. Latency, Freud said that that our sexual urges are pressed down into the unconscious, and that all of our energy is focused outwardly on forming social relationships. Right, and then finally, adulthood, puberty to death, the genital stage. Fixation here is the genitals. It's what we think of as sex. And so Freud said that fixation in this stage is normal. All right, so defense mechanisms. Probably the thing that Freud was maybe the most correct about. His daughter actually came up with most of them. But Freud said that when our id does stuff that our ego doesn't like, when the id kind of wins, right, we need to have certain protective methods. We have different protective methods to reduce anxiety. We talked about it in this last unit. We could call this cognitive dissonance as well. Okay? And we do this by distorting reality. Now, according to Freud, these defense mechanisms happen unconsciously. Right? In reality, we do these, or at least some of them there is empirical evidence for. Most of the time, whether we admit it or not, we know that we're doing them. So, all right, the cornerstone of psychoanalysis, repression. Freud believed that memories and whatnot, thoughts, feelings that caused us anxiety, we would push those down into the unconscious. And that they would pop out every once in a while, but it's basically just motivated forgetting. And these repressed thoughts and memories would come out as dreams and whatnot. Repression is not real. All right, regression. Freud said that when we get anxious, oftentimes we will revert back to a psychosexual stage that we are fixated in. So if you have an oral fixation and whenever you get anxious, maybe you bite your nails, Freud said that is regressed. That's regressing back to the oral stage. It can also be acting younger than you are. You see this sometimes with kids, like 5-6-year-olds who are like potty trained, and then they find out that their parents are going to have another baby, and all of a sudden they start wetting the bed again. Okay, that would also be considered regression. Reaction formations. Reaction formations is when we feel one way about something, but it's an unacceptable thought that we have. And so we outwardly act in the opposite manner. Okay? Middle schoolers picking on the person that they have a crush on. All right? That would be considered a reaction formation. Projection. When we feel one way, okay, when we have a threatening impulse, and rather than acknowledging it in ourselves, we go around accusing other people of doing that thing. Okay, so, people that lie all the time oftentimes are very quick to accuse other people of lying. Think of one person in particular. Rationalization. Rationalization is just like if something bad happens, you do something bad, we find ways to justify it. Okay? If you get rejected from a college, you're going to say, oh, I didn't want to go there anyways. Okay? Or if you get dumped, they weren't that great anyways. Displacement. Displacement is when you have some sort of aggressive urge towards something, towards a threatening thing that you can't take it out on, because it would actually cause more anxiety to take it out on it. Like if you're mad at your dad and you can't just go up and yell at him, so instead of that you go and you kick your little sibling. All right, so displacement is taking out aggression on something that is less threatening or more acceptable. Sublimation. Sublimation is the only healthy defense mechanism. Sublimation is when we have some sort of threatening impulse or whatnot, and instead of using it for good, we turn it into something socially approved. So, if you're interested, if you have the urge to hurt animals, and instead of hurting animals, you become a veterinarian. Okay, that's flipping that urge into something that is more socially acceptable. And then denial. Denial it's different from repression. Repression is literally pushing it into the unconscious. Denial is just simply just not acknowledging something. Okay. All right, how do we measure, how do we assess the personality? All right, projective tests. Projective tests are the methods that they often use. The idea of these projective tests, where they would show you some sort of ambiguous image, and then you would make up something about it, and through making up something about it, you projected your own unconscious onto it. TAT, okay, a thematic apperception test. They show you an ambiguous picture, and then you have to make up a story about it. And then a Rorschach inkblot test, same idea. Instead of it being an actual picture, it's just an ink blot in varying shapes. Okay, so there's an example right there. You all can look at Neo-Freudians yourself. I highly doubt you would be asked about that. All right, so psychoanalysis look to tap into the unconscious. Right? After psychoanalysis, or sometime after, I'm not exactly sure the time. Another area of study of personality, what is called the trait perspective. Okay. Traits are stable and enduring patterns of behavior. Traits are essentially disposition or temperament, okay, that sort of underlie all of our behavior. Name to associate with this is Gordon Allport. The difference with trait and all the other theories of personality is they simply look to describe individuals, but they don't give any explanation as to why. They just say, here are traits. To measure traits, all right, they figured out how to put people in along dimensions of personality. Okay, so just like with colors, we would have a whole spectrum of different traits. And to measure this, in the use of, they use what are called personality inventories, but they use a statistical technique called factor analysis. Factor analysis is when they would look at questions, and you essentially look at how people's answers to certain questions correlate, and they could say, all right, people tend to answer this question, this question, this question, and this question the same, all right, and they would fall into this trait. That would fall into that trait. So just looking at how different components, identifying clusters of items that correlate with each other in terms of how they are answered.
What was Waiting concept again?
The hidden meaning of dreams. The original dimensions were what Hans Eysenck's 2 dimensions, where he basically brought down these reduced personality down to 2 traits, extroversion and introversion, and then emotional stability. And we all kind of fall a different area of that spectrum. We don't have to worry about that stuff. All right, how do we assess personality traits? Personality inventories, okay, they are mostly just true, false, agree, disagree, so on and so forth. Okay, they are what is called empirically derived, which means they are based off of evidence. Empirical evidence is scientific evidence. But they look to see, by using factor analysis, they look to see, all right, does answering a certain question a certain way correlate with depression or something like that? Okay, looking and seeing how these different factors interact with one another. So, like, what does, if I have a group of depressed people versus non-depressed people, how do they answer questions differently? Two examples of personality inventories. The MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which was initially used to measure emotional disorders. Now it's used mostly for employment screening. And then the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory, also called 16 Personalities. That is, it's a neo-Freudian one. This one has, I talked about this a couple of, this one has low test-retest reliability. Okay, meaning it's not really scientifically supported. You have a 50% chance of getting a different personality type if you take it twice within a 3-week period.
I took it over 3 years, and I got the same thing all 3 years.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's 50%, so.
Not like
All right, the personality inventory that is considered to be the most legitimate now is the Big Five. Okay, the Big Five took Eysenck's 2 dimensions, and it expanded them into 5. Make sure that you know what the 5 dimensions of personality are on the Big 5. They had at least one of these, and maybe they asked about the whole thing on one of the FRQs last year.
It was on my test. It talked about the like 5.
The what?
It talked about the Big 5 on my test.
Oh, yeah.
So even,
Yeah, they asked about the Big 5 a lot. So make sure you know the difference between like what these different personality traits are. Way that you can remember them is either canoe, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion, or ocean. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. All right, weaknesses of trait perspective. Okay, it's self-reporting usually, so it can be biased because we're reporting on ourselves. And then the trait perspective tends to ignore what is called the person-situation controversy. And certain situations can cause people to act differently. Okay, they think traits are stable, but behaviors can vary based on the situation. All right, social cognitive perspective, kind of the opposite of the trait perspective. Albert Bandura is the father of social cognitive perspective. We know him from the Bobo doll as well. Okay, so essentially social cognitive looks at how our environment and our thinking interact with one another. And how does our environment impact how we think, and how does how we think impact our environment? Main idea with social cognitive perspective is reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism looks at the interacting factors. It looks at how behavior, cognition, and the environment all interact to form our personality. How does the environment change how we think, and then how does how we think change how we behave, and then how does how we behave affect our environment, and so on and so forth. So reciprocal means to give back. All 3 of these factors give back to one another to form our full personality and who we are. So different people choose different environments. And then once you choose a certain environment, that environment shapes you. You shape the environment. Environment shapes you. And then our personalities shape how we interpret and react to situations. Right? People who see the world as threatening tend to be more prepared for threats, receive more threats. People that are anxious in relationships tend to make the other person anxious as well, which then in turn makes them more anxious. Okay, and then our personalities create situations in which we react to them. Okay, so are there any questions about reciprocal determinism? All right, so criticism of that one, too much emphasis on the situation, not enough on traits. So it's the opposite of trait theory criticism. All right, humanistic perspective. Okay, Abraham Maslow we talked about yesterday, and then Carl Rogers. All right, so humanism kind of came out of the negativity of Sigmund Freud and sort of the roboticness of behaviorism. And humanism focuses on us trying to reach our full potential. Okay, and how we strive to become the best person that we can be. Humanists believe in free will, meaning they believe that everything is a choice, and that the choices we make shape how we shape becoming self-actualized. I talked about this yesterday, so I'm not going to talk about it again. Okay, self-actualized people. All right, so from Maslow comes a therapist named Carl Rogers. Rogers develops what is called person-centered therapy. Rogers believes that people are all basically good. We just need to be in the right environment. And we're all like acorns. And he said that we need three things for us to grow and become the best that we can be. We need to have genuineness, right? Meaning we need to have people be real with us. We need to have acceptance. And we need to have empathy. We need to get empathy and we need to show empathy. Main thing you need to know with Rogers is, other than like what we talked about with therapy, with like active listening, is unconditional positive regard. All right, unconditional positive regard is the idea that we need to be accepted for who we are. Okay, that our parents need to accept us for who we are, that our friends have to accept us, and that we have to accept other people as well. We need to accept others, and we need to accept ourselves. Okay, and it doesn't mean like if you do something wrong, it's okay for your parents to be like you screwed up. All right, but they need to be like, I still love you, okay, but you screwed up. All right, self-concept, just the idea of who we are. And Rogers said that a lot of like our anxiety and whatnot comes from what is called incongruence, which is where if we do not get unconditional positive regard, all right, so he basically said that we have what is called our real self and our ideal self. And to become self-actualized, those two things should be the one and the same, right? But when our real self differs a lot from our ideal self, this leads to incongruence, which makes us feel anxious, makes us doubt ourselves, and so on and so forth. All right. Okay. Criticism. Humanism's very selfish. Kind of ignores human capacity for evil. And it's very vague. Okay, and it's probably just their own values. Okay. All right, finally. Okay. Self-focused perspective. Okay, looking at the self is the center of our personality. Self-focus this goes into what is called positive psychology, which is a newer field. This used to it can kind of lump it in with the humanistic perspective a little bit. I can't remember what I have written. When I've been combining all these PowerPoints, they've all been like reformatted, which is why there's like overlap and stuff. All right, so self-focus basically is how do we look at ourselves. Spotlight effect is our tendency to overestimate how much people are paying attention to what we are doing. All right, if you trip in the hallway, you think that everybody saw you and everybody's making fun of you. All right, in reality, nobody probably saw you. Okay, all right, self-esteem, feelings of high or low self-worth. Self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to succeed in the future at things. This is like one of the favorite terms for FRQs. All right, so benefits and costs of self-esteem. People with high self-esteem more likely to accept other people, have a better sense of self-worth. But people with too high a self-esteem, people that are way too optimistic tend to be blind to risks. And a lot of times self-esteem and actual ability don't match up. The Dunning-Kruger effect. A lot of times the people who have the highest self-esteem and are the most overconfident are the least competent. They are ignorant of their own ignorance. Showed that a little bit when I had you all predict the scores that you were going to get on the Unit 9 test, and most people were relatively close, but there were one or two people who were like 50 points off. Okay. Another cost of too high a self-esteem. All right, self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is our tendency to perceive ourselves favorably, and if we do something good, we accept responsibility for it. But if something bad happens, we tend to blame other people if something bad happens. It's not our fault when something goes wrong. It's because of our own ability when something goes right. Narcissism, excessive self-love and self-absorption. There's a difference between being narcissistic and having narcissistic personality disorder. NPD is a much more serious thing. But the thing with narcissists, narcissism is a thin shell. All right, narcissism is just a layer of veneer on the outside. Okay, people that are narcissistic tend to, in reality, be very, very insecure, and they project this air of superiority because they are so insecure. But narcissists, as soon as that bubble is popped, as soon as a narcissist is like attacked for something, they tend to get very aggressive. All right, and then culture in the self. Okay, individualism versus collectivism. Individualistic cultures versus collectivistic cultures. Individualistic cultures tend to be more Western. All right, so like the United States would be considered to be a very individualistic culture. All right, our focus, our identity is tied up in our own personal attributes rather than group identification. All right, and we value our own personal things. Just think about how some Americans have responded to having to wear a mask. Like, my body, my choice when it's something that they don't want to do, but then if it's somebody else's body, then it's perfectly fine for them to tell them no, they can't do that. But so individualistic cultures tend to be more focused on themselves, right? And what their own ideals and whatnot are. Collectivistic cultures, which tend to be more Eastern, countries like Japan and Korea, give priority to the group over the individual, and they actually put a lot more emphasis on fitting in. Right? In Western culture, conformity is seen as being kind of a bad thing. In collectivistic Eastern culture, conformity is something that is respected. Okay, because you don't want to rock the boat because then you're screwing up the group. Collectivistic cultures tend to identify much more with like family structure as well. A lot more respect of like elders and things like that. Okay, guys, so that is it for personality. On